zombie apocalypse author Camille Picott. Welcome to the Unabridged Audiobook of Red Virus, Book 1 of Zommunist Invasion. If you enjoy the free audiobooks I offer on my channel, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell all your friends. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy the adventure.
Chapter 34. 5th Grade. The transmitter was once again strapped to Dal's back. He and Lena approached Bastopol from the south side of town. They'd chosen the elementary school for their entry point. It was at the end of the downtown strip, only 2 blocks from Guy's electronics superstore. He and Lena were each armed with a Russian machine gun and a knife. Dal hoped they could avoid using the guns, but at least they were Soviet-issued weapons. With any luck, if they had to shoot, enemy soldiers would assume the shots came from Russian soldiers. "Do you think the whole town has been turned into zombies?" Lena asked, as howling pierced the night. "I don't know. I imagine there are some survivors." Which was another reason they had to get their broadcast out. If anyone out there had an infected friend or family member who hadn't turned, they needed to know the danger they were in. They reached the back of the elementary school. The soccer field bordered the orchard. He and Lena paused to scan the field. There were bodies there, both dead and, based on the way they moved, zombified. The bodies were small, clearly the figures of kids. The elementary school had been attacked with the same ruthless efficiency as everywhere else. God, the Soviets were such sick assholes. Who killed kids in an invasion? It's not like they were a threat. "Look!" Lena raised her hand and pointed. "Over by the gym." Past the soccer field was the gym. The door was open, light spilling out. Dal saw Soviets inside. "We need a closer look," Lena said. "Maybe we can learn something else important for the broadcast." Dal shifted uneasily and glanced at his watch. "We only have 28 minutes to get to Guy's." "I know," Lena chewed at her bottom lip. "But the more information we have, the better." "We won't have any information to share if we get ourselves shot." Lena reached across the darkness and pressed a hand to his knee. "We won't take any unnecessary risks. We have to go past the school anyway. 3 minutes, that's all I ask. Let's just see if we can learn anything else important." She was right. If they were careful, and if they could learn anything else useful, it was worth the risk. "Okay, 3 minutes." They resumed their ride to the school, pedaling behind a cluster of portable classrooms where they were shielded from sight. They propped the bikes up against the side of the building. "This is the right thing to do." Lena stood on her toes and kissed him softly on the lips. He pulled her against him and held her for a long moment, pressing his nose into her hair. Lena gave him one more peck on the cheek before breaking away. They crept along behind the back of the classrooms, moving in the direction of the gymnasium. The gym had been installed a few years ago after some aggressive fundraising by the PTA. When Dal had been in high school, classmates had groused about the little kids having the nicest gym in the county. Some of the local churches and clubs even rented it out for events. Dal heard the Russians before he saw them. They weren't making any effort to moderate their voices. He and Lena peeked around a 5th grade classroom and had a perfect view of the gym. "Is this close enough?" he whispered to Lena. "Yeah, it'll do." They crouched against the back of a 5th grade classroom, watching. The Russians had a fleet of shiny new trucks and jeeps. It looked like they raided a car dealership. In the back of the vehicles were boxes. Lots and lots of boxes, which they unloaded into the gym. It's food, Lena said. It looks like they cleaned out every grocery store in town, Dal whispered. They're stockpiling it all in one place. That didn't bode well. If there were survivors in Bastopol, there'd be no supplies once family cupboards were empty. He planned to tell everyone where these supplies were in his broadcast tonight. They keep talking about the second offensive. That's the name of the second wave of soldiers Jim and Tate told us about. I think they're stockpiling food for that. They continued to kneel in the darkness behind the fifth-grade classroom. Dal ran a hand over the prefab siding, recalling what it had been like to be 11 years old. Fifth grade was a dark time in his memory. It was the first time his dad had thrown him so hard into the wall that his shoulder had been dislocated. He remembered snot dribbling out of his nose onto the brown linoleum floor as he cried. He remembered choking on his own saliva. He remembered the smashed bits of sheetrock on his clothes and in his hair. He remembered that even though the kitchen reeked of pine sol, his mom could never keep it clean enough to satisfy his father. Daddy didn't mean it. That's what his mom always said. Daddy didn't mean it. You'll be all right, Dal. Let Mommy see your shoulder. He would never forget the pain of having his arm slammed back into the socket. It echoed all the way back through the years. Daddy didn't mean it. How many fucking times had he heard that as a kid? Daddy didn't mean it. What were his parents doing now? Had his dad made it back from Rossi? Did they know about the zombies? Were they safe? Why did he even care if they were safe? There would always be that little piece inside him that belonged to his parents. A little boy who wanted his parents to love him. Dal hated that part of himself, almost as much as he hated the rage that lurked inside him. Something warm touched his hand. He looked down to see Lena's fingers laced with his. She squeezed his hand. Her touch brought him back to the present, back from the tunnel of hell that had been his fifth-grade year. The voices of the Russians crashed in around him. 2 weeks, Lena was saying. What? Dal asked. Lena squeezed his hand again. She'd only been a scrawny kid when Dal had been in fifth grade, but she'd been old enough to recognize he didn't carry normal kid bruises. He always figured her parents instructed her not to ask about them. He remembered her staring at them, but she never said a word. The second offensive will be here within the next 2 weeks, Lena said. They're coming by cargo boat. Dal let the enormity of those words sink in. The Russians had created a virus that turned people into zombies. Then, after the Nezhet rampaged around for a week or more, they would all die out. Then, the second offensive would arrive. There would be food and housing for everyone. America would be theirs for the taking. Did they say anything about their immunity? Dal asked. No. Lena took one last look at the Soviets in the gym. He knew she wanted to stick around longer, but all she said was, "We should go. We've been here long enough." They slunk away from the buildings, pushing their bikes back into the apple orchard. Once they were safely in the trees, they paused to get back onto their bikes. As they did, a loud snap came from their left. Dal and Lena spun just as a Soviet soldier stepped out from behind a tree. His fly hung open. Time froze. The Soviet stared at them. Dal and Lena stared back. Then the Soviet moved, hand flying to his waist as he drew his dart gun. Dal reflexively threw Lena to the ground, shielding her with his body. Several red darts flew over the top of them as they landed painfully on top of their bikes. Dal barely registered the pain. He scrambled to his feet and dove for the enemy soldier, tackling him around the legs. Lena jumped up and rammed the heel of her Converse on the Russian's forearm, pinning the dart gun in the dirt. Everything happened so fast. The Russian rolled, freeing his arm from Lena's shoe. Dal attempted to hold him in place, but the other man was bigger. He kneed Dal in the stomach and shoved him aside. Dal's back hit an apple tree, the breath whooshing out of his body from the impact. The Russian sat up, dart gun aimed at Lena. Dal's entire universe stopped spinning. All he could see was Lena, the dart gun, and the Russian who intended to hurt her. Rage and fear surged inside him like a red tide. He grabbed his knife and charged. He buried the blade in the man's back. The man tipped over and collapsed. Fury pumped through him. Lena! This asshole had tried to hurt Lena! The rage inside his body was like an inferno. Dal couldn't control himself. He stabbed the man over and over and over again. Something barreled into him from the side. Lena. The force of her body rocked him sideways. It was enough to snap the spell. He tumbled sideways into the dirt beneath the apple trees. He lay there panting, with Lena sprawled out on top of him. He forced himself to release the knife. When he raised his hand, he found it coated with blood. His eyes jerked to the Russian. The man was dead, his back and chest a bloody mess. Dal wanted to shred the bastard with his bare hands. Dal! Lena held his face between her hands, eyes searching. Their eyes met. Dal felt sick. All the rage and fury boiling inside him drained away in an instant. All that was left was shame. Shame that he had inherited the worst imaginable trait from his father. Shame that Lena had seen it. And not just once. How many times had he lost his temper in the last 24 hours? This invasion was bringing out the worst in him. He felt sick. He extricated himself, turning his back when Lena tried to put her arms around him. She deserved better. Mr. Cecchino wouldn't want a monster for his daughter. He wiped his bloody fist on the pant leg of his jeans. The face of the slack Russian loomed large in his periphery. Dal couldn't look directly at the damage he'd done, but he saw the mash of red from the corner of his eye. He was a monster, no different from the Nezhet. The asshole had been down as soon as Dal sank his knife into his back. There had been no need to keep stabbing him. There had never been a need for his father to beat him or his mom, but he did it anyway. We have to go. Lena dragged him toward the bikes. I don't think they hurt us, but sooner or later someone is going to come looking for this guy. She was right. Dal numbly climbed onto his bike, careful not to look at her. Dal? He pushed his feet against the pedals, racing away through the dark. Chapter 35. Bastapole High. Bastapole High. Leo and his team pedaled silently toward the school. The cream stucco walls rose up before them. Nearby were the bleachers and football field. Leo inhaled the familiar scent of the turf. It filled his nostrils, but mixed with it was the tang of death. There were bodies everywhere, both dead and undead. He could almost imagine the zombies scuttling around on the field were football players, not murdered teenagers. Almost. It had been a bloodbath here. The lost days of his youth came rushing back to him. Leo could almost reach out and touch the boy he had been. 18 years old and madly in love with the captain of the cheerleading squad. 18 years old and on top of the world with a football scholarship and a bright future. 18 years old with a mom still alive. It was like looking at a stranger. The world had sculpted him into a new man. For the first time, Leo was able to look at the lost version of himself without bitterness. They had been good days. He didn't regret having lived them, not for a second. "I've been wondering about something." Anton rode up beside him. "What were you doing there? At the field, I mean. When the Russians attacked. Practice wasn't over. You weren't due to arrive for at least another hour." "I like watching you play." Leo briefly met his brother's gaze. "Sometimes I came early to watch." "But I never saw you." "I know. I watched from underneath the bleachers." Anton's eyes widened in surprise. Leo pedaled faster, pulling ahead. He didn't mind confessing to Anton, but that didn't mean he wanted to draw out the moment. He stopped when they were 50 yards from the school. He waited for the others to catch up with him. "You all know the plan," Leo said. "Anton and Bruce attack from the bleachers, Jim and Tate from the cafeteria. Jennifer and I have the theater building. At 2:05, start throwing bombs. At 2:10, get the hell out of here. We rendezvous at the Goldschmidt apple orchard." He paused, remembering the times he'd spent in the Goldschmidt orchard. It had been a popular party spot back in high school. The owner lived in Colorado and only visited occasionally, leaving the land open for high school adventure and mischief. Leo had his first taste of alcohol beneath those trees, courtesy of Jim. It was the first place he'd kissed Jennifer. He glanced in her direction and found her looking at him. From the soft smile on her lips, he knew she was remembering their times in the orchard. They had been good times. "We wait in the orchard until 2:40. Then we ride back to the cabin. If someone doesn't show—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "We clear out and ride back to the cabin at 2:40. Dal and Lena will meet us at home. Everyone ready?" He scanned the faces of his companions, fixing their faces in his mind. Jennifer was the first to move. "Let's go." They left their bikes outside the school and dispersed, breaking into their separate teams. Jennifer fell into step beside Leo. "How far we've come, Leo Cicchino," she said. "Former high school homecoming king and queen turned guerrilla soldiers." He wrinkled his brow. "Sounds like a bad movie when you say it like that." "It is a bad movie, don't you think?" He tightened his grip on his rifle. "Yeah, pretty fucking bad." His boot touched the blacktop of Bastapole High. The back of the science wing was in front of them. There were 2 dead bodies on the ground, both of them lying in pools of sticky blood. Leo forced himself to look at the bodies. He didn't recognize them, but no doubt Anton would know who they were. Tonight was all about saving people. If they were successful, they could stop more senseless slaughter like this. They crept to the edge of the science building. Beyond it was a big quad surrounded on all sides by classrooms. On the far side of the quad was the high school auditorium. That was their destination. In the quad were at least a dozen bodies. There was also a pack of 4 Nejet. They huddled near the English wing around a dark lump. Leo couldn't be certain, but it looked like they were eating a dog. At least he hoped it was a dog and not a person. "Do we take them out?" Jennifer whispered. "No. We don't want to draw attention to ourselves if we can help it. Let's try to sneak by them." "Okay." Without waiting for him, Jennifer stepped out into the open. That was Jennifer. She'd always been a girl of action. They eased across the quad. Jennifer moved with the grace of a gymnast, walking on her tiptoes. Leo might not be as graceful as she was, but he could be light-footed when he wanted to. They stepped around a dead girl in neon stretch pants and black blouse with shoulder pads. Blood pooled around her head like a halo. It was sickening to see. Leo supposed he should be grateful she was really dead and not reanimated like the student Dal and Lena had seen in Rossi. Across the quad, one of the zombies let up a loud yipping sound. She jumped on the Nejet next to her, the two of them squabbling over what looked like an animal leg. It was enough to make a person gag, but it kept the attention off Leo and Jennifer. They reached the auditorium without incident and stepped around the side of the building. "There it is," Jennifer whispered. "Our old friend." She was referring to the fire access ladder bolted to the side of the wall. The bottom rung was a good 10 feet off the ground. That had never deterred Leo and Jennifer. If anything, that 10 feet had been a challenge. Side by side, they crossed to the metal garbage can that sat nearby. It was riddled with bullet holes. They each grabbed a side and hefted the can off the ground, moving it beneath the fire access ladder. "Just like old times," Leo said. "Just like old times," Jennifer agreed. "You go first." Jennifer looked like she wanted to argue. She always did that whenever she thought her female independence was being threatened. Luckily, all she did was give Leo an eye roll before hopping onto the garbage can. As soon as her feet landed, balancing on either side of the can, something unexpected happened. The trash can gave a loud, metallic groan and tilted to the right. Too late, Leo realized one side had been weakened from the bullets. The metal bent under Jennifer's weight. Not a lot, but just enough to make noise. The reaction of the Nejet was instantaneous. Howls went up from all over the campus. "Go!" Leo yelled. Jennifer gave him a wide-eyed look before leaping. Her hands grabbed the bottom rung of the ladder. She pulled herself up easily, scrambling to make room for him. "Leo!" she cried. The 4 zombies from the quad came tearing around the corner of the auditorium. Their black-veined skin and red eyes filled his vision. Leo leaped onto the top of the can. "Jump, Leo!" Jennifer screamed. Leo jumped. He had at least 50 pounds on Jennifer, if not more. The can listed loudly, further crumpling under his weight. Leo's right hand completely missed the ladder, the fingers of his left hand snagging the bottom rung. The foremost of the Nejet barreled into the trash can, sending it flying across the blacktop. It banged against the ground as it rolled, inciting another round of howls and barks from campus. Leo dangled from one hand, feet kicking as he fought to avoid the hands of the Nejet. His hand was sweaty, his grip on the ladder precarious. The zombies jumped up and down, swiping at him with dirty, bloody fingers. "Give me your other hand." Jennifer hung upside down, her legs folded over a ladder rung like it was a gymnastics bar. Both her arms swung free, reaching for Leo. Leo pulled with everything he had, thankful for every moment in the orchard spent hefting 50-pound apple packs. He lifted himself just far enough to grab Jennifer's outstretched hands. She dug her nails into his skin and pulled at him with both hands. A zombie snagged one shoelace. For one terrifying moment, Leo thought he was a goner. Then the lace came untied. The zombie fell backward to the ground with a frustrated snarl. With Jennifer's help, Leo was able to grab the ladder with his right hand. He scrambled out of reach, heart pounding as his boots finally found purchase on the bottom ladder rung. Jennifer refused to let go, twining her hands into the flannel of his shirt. She still hung upside down. Her hair was in a bun, but a few curls sprang loose around her face. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," she snapped. She released him, lifting her torso into an upright position as she scaled nimbly up the ladder. Leo let out a shaky breath, looking down one more time at the snapping neigette. They were working themselves into a frenzy. Even worse, more had joined them. The pack had expanded to 7, with several more on their way. Leo focused on the ladder, hurrying after Jennifer to the rooftop. Chapter 36. Choices. "Only 10 zombies over here." Jennifer was on the west side of the roof, assessing the number of neigette on the ground below the ladder. "It's ironic, don't you think?" 10 zombies are ironic? Leo stood on the north side, scanning the school with his binoculars. Anton and Bruce were already on the bleachers. Jim and Tate had just taken up their position on the cafeteria. "No, it's ironic you're hell-bent on protecting me, but I'm the one who keeps saving your ass." He lowered the binoculars and frowned at her. "Thank you for pulling me up the ladder. Is that what you wanted to hear?" "You're welcome." She gave him a winning smile before moving off to study the infected on the south side of the building. Leo rolled his eyes and resumed studying the campus. Apparently, his motives had been completely transparent. Jennifer had never been one for chivalry. Oh well, screw it. He wasn't going to change or apologize just because he annoyed his ex-girlfriend. Someday, he'd meet a girl who didn't confuse chivalry with chauvinism. Leo scanned the narrow street between the classrooms and the football field. Just a few days ago, he'd parked his truck on this very street before going to watch Anton at practice. There were dead bodies everywhere, some rotting wherever they'd fallen. Others had been turned into neigette. Many of both varieties were in football uniforms. God, this place had been a slaughterhouse. "How much longer?" Jennifer asked. 18 minutes. She let out an impatient huff, prowling back and forth across the rooftop. "I hate waiting." She peered over the edge again, this time on the side street. "There's 12 of them down there. I should be looking forward to dropping bombs on them, but, well, you know." Leo did know. It didn't feel good to kill people, teenagers who had been part of their community. He reminded himself they weren't really killing them. The Russians had done that the moment they infected them with the neigette virus. "I'm just glad we're not students here anymore," Jennifer said. "At least I can't put names to the ones down there." That wouldn't be the case for Anton and Bruce. What would it be like for them? Would it put them in danger? Not that he doubted Anton. His little brother would do what needed to be done. "Will you please say something?" Jennifer rounded on him, hands on her hips. "The silence is killing me." What was his name? The words popped out before Leo could stop them. She stared at him. To give her credit, she didn't play dumb. She knew exactly what he was asking. For his part, Leo had done his best to sideline the information that Jennifer had fallen in love with another guy. But now that he found himself faced with waiting, the knowledge kept surfacing. It was like being poked in the side repeatedly with a sharp stick. It might not pierce the skin, but it was still irritating. "His name was Brad," Jennifer said at last. "How did you meet him?" "At a party." "What was he like?" Jennifer looked away and resumed her pacing. "Are you sure you want to know?" Leo wasn't sure at all. "Yeah." "He was a lot like you. Serious, nice, committed." Leo could not have been more shocked if she'd said the guy, Brad, was an alien. "He was like me?" he asked, incredulous. "Yeah," she shrugged. "Guess I attract a certain type of guy." "But you said he broke your heart." Leo couldn't imagine himself ever having done that. "He did, but I broke his first." Jennifer crossed her arms over her chest and looked out in the night. This wasn't making any sense. Leo chewed on the information, trying to decide if he wanted to know more. Morbid curiosity got the better of him. "So, you broke his heart, then he broke yours?" "Yep." "So what, you dumped him and then tried to get back together with him?" She didn't answer. She stopped pacing and studied the neige massed on the ground beneath the ladder. Seconds ticked by. Leo began to wonder if she'd heard him. It would probably be better if he dropped the subject entirely. It wasn't his business anyway. Jennifer turned around and faced him. "I got an abortion." He gaped at her, stupefied. "What?" "Brad got me pregnant. When I told him, he wanted us to get married. I got an abortion without telling him, and he dumped me." Jennifer didn't flinch as Leo gawked at her, but he saw what the admission cost her. He'd never thought to see despair and self-loathing in Jennifer Miola's eyes. He didn't know what to say. He knew for a fact that if he'd gotten her pregnant, he'd have proposed to her on the spot. It was easy for him to understand Brad's reaction. He tried to imagine what it must have been like for Jennifer. Barely 20 years old. Her entire life plan derailed. Without a doubt, she'd been scared. He could understand her not wanting to be a mother at 20. Hell, they were the same age. He didn't feel ready to be a parent either. "Do you think I'm a terrible person?" she asked. "Does it matter what I think?" She let out a long breath. "It shouldn't, but for some reason it does." Leo considered his answer. "Do you think you made the right choice?" "I don't know." She hung her head. Leo remembered what it had been like to stand at a crossroads. Finding those bills on his dad's desk had changed him. He'd been an asshole to everyone he loved after that. "We all make choices every day." Leo crossed the rooftop and put an arm around her shoulders. All we can do is live with them." She shuddered and slipped her arms around him. She didn't cry, but he felt the sorrow radiating from her. He'd sensed it when she'd first arrived, but he hadn't understood it until now. It was why she'd made the comment about their being parents if they'd stayed together after high school. Jennifer was wrestling with her own personal demon. Leo squeezed her tight. He couldn't fix things for her, but he could be there when she needed someone to lean on. He wasn't entirely surprised when she stood on her toes and softly kissed his lips. He pulled back and kissed her on the forehead, tightening his arms around her so she wouldn't think he was rejecting her. "I'm here for you," he said, "as a friend." "Thanks." She sighed and rested her head on his chest. "I had to try, to see if we were really over." "I know." Jennifer was the girl who once drank half a bottle of tequila in an apple orchard just to find out what it felt like to black out. Who'd have thought life would throw him so many curveballs that he'd fall out of love with Jennifer Miola? Talk about a quarterback sneak. He'd never seen it coming, yet here it was. "Friends forever?" Jennifer asked. "Of course," Leo said, voice gruff. "We took each other's virginity after all. That counts for something." Jennifer's shoulders shook with silent laughter. When she stepped out of his arms, affection swept through him. He felt closer to her than he ever had before. Then a collective howl lit the night, echoing through the streets of Bastopol. It wasn't just a random pack going crazy. Dozens and dozens of them were going apeshit. Something had caught the attention of the zombies. Chapter 37. Hammer to Fall. "We're screwed." Dal and Lena hid inside the open storefront of a downtown furniture store. The windows had been shot out. Guy's Electronics Superstore was within eyesight, the big blue and yellow neon sign easy to spot. Between them and the superstore was a street full of abandoned cars, dead bodies, and prowling Nejet. And only 15 minutes left before Leo raised hell at the high school. "We're screwed," Lena agreed. Dal studied the street, chewing at his bottom lip. There were more infected than they'd anticipated. Dumb luck had been the only reason they'd made it into the furniture store. The side alleyway door had been left unlocked in the confusion of the invasion. They were safe for the moment, but Dal could see no clear route to the superstore. Sure, they could try to circle around, but there wasn't time. "We have to try to make our own distraction," he said. "It has to be enough to draw the zombies, but not enough to draw the Russians." Lena gave him a long look before pulling off her backpack. She unzipped it, revealing her Walkman. Nestled next to it was a small portable speaker that attached to the cassette player with a slender wire. "I brought this as a backup plan," Lena explained. "We can turn it on and leave it to play. It will draw the infected while we slip away." God, he loved this girl. He wished he was a better man for her. "Good thinking." "Thanks." Lena pulled the items out of her backpack. "We're only going to have one shot at this." "We should put it in the alleyway where we came in," Dal said. "As soon as the Nejet are past the front of the shop, we make a run for it." Lena nodded in agreement. This was their only option. He just had to hope Leo would stick to the plan and launch his attack at the designated time. Dal and Lena would need every minute to get into position at the superstore. They crept to the back of the furniture shop with the Walkman. "Did you bring anything besides Russian language tapes?" Dal asked. "Of course. I brought Queen." Lena gripped the cassette player in one hand, the portable speaker in the other. "Freddie Mercury should be enough to get their attention." They reached the metal door that led into the alleyway. Dal drew his knife and turned the deadbolt. There was a soft snarl on the other side. A second later, something rammed against the other side of the door. Shit. They had to get rid of this Nejet before he brought more. "Get ready," Dal whispered. Lena pursed her lips and nodded, one finger hovering over the play button on her Walkman. Dal braced his leg against the door and turned the knob. The infected slammed into the door, but Dal leaned into it and kept it from flying open. The Nejet went berserk, howling and barking as he tried to force his way through. Dal jammed his knife through a narrow slit in the opening, aiming for the zombie's face. The blade slid off the cheekbone and punctured the left eyeball. The howling and barking was cut off. The zombie died instantly, sliding backwards off the knife. Dal made a mental note that head blows were the most effective way to kill a Nejet. Wish he'd figured that out sooner. As soon as the zombie was down, Lena dashed forward. She sat the Walkman next to the dead zombie, positioned the speaker in the cradle of his arm, and hit play. Queen's "Hammer to Fall" blasted out of the tiny speaker. The reaction was instantaneous. Howls lit the night, a crescendo that crashed over the downtown like a tidal wave. It sounded like they'd snagged the attention of every Nejet in a half-mile radius. Dal slammed the alley door and turned the deadbolt. He and Lena retreated back to the front of the shop and hid behind a lazy boy. They peeked over the edge of the couch and watched a huge pack of Nejet lope past, all of them barking and growling. Their attention was zeroed in on the entrance to the alleyway. Freddie Mercury's voice poured into the night and filled every crevice. The road to the superstore was clear. "Come on." Dal grabbed Lena's hand. They ran for the bikes. Chapter 38. Statue of Liberty. "What the hell?" Leo raced to the edge of the theater roof, pulling out his binoculars. He scanned the downtown, which seemed to be the epicenter of the uproar. Barks and howls assailed his ears. "It sounds like the zombies are having a riot," Jennifer said. "What do you see?" "Nothing. It's too dark." He lowered the binoculars, frustration clawing at him. "That noise is coming from downtown," Jennifer said. "Dal and Lena are in trouble." Leo had come to the same conclusion. "Damn it, guys," he muttered. "What's going on down there?" Jennifer raced to the backpacks they'd left in the middle of the roof. Leo reached her just as she began pulling out bombs. "Not yet," he said. "What are you talking about?" She glared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Dal and Lena are in trouble." "I know." The next words were some of the hardest he'd ever spoken. "But our job is to distract the Russians so they can make the broadcast. If we attack too soon, we jeopardize their chances. If we don't attack now, Dal and Lena might die." Leo closed his eyes, fighting the anxiety knotting his chest. Hearing the crazed zombies made him want to do something, anything. But they'd all agreed on the Statue of Liberty play. Quite a few things had to happen for that play to work. The receivers and linemen had to look convincing. The quarterback had to have the ball in the right place at the right time. The player making the run had to be there to grab the ball. If anything was off, the play went south. Timing was everything. "We have a chance to save hundreds of lives, maybe thousands," Leo said. "The mission is the broadcast. Dal and Lena know the broadcast time." "Have you lost your mind?" Jennifer cried. "What if they don't live to make the broadcast?" Leo clenched his fists. He trusted Dal and Lena with his life. He trusted them to make the play. "We wait," he said. He held up his watch for Jennifer to see. 12 minutes. Chapter 39. Guy's Electronic Superstore. Dal and Lena pedaled frantically down the street, swerving around dead bodies. Dal immediately realized their miscalculation. The music had indeed drawn every Nezhet on the downtown street in front of Guy's. What he hadn't taken into consideration were the zombies coming from farther away. A pack of 5 burst around a corner. At the sight of Lena and Dal on the bikes, they howled. Shit! Dal didn't want to use his machine gun, but he had no choice. The Nezhet would be on them in 30 seconds. He'd long ago learned to ride without hands. Never letting up on the pedals, he shifted his weight backwards in the seat and grabbed his machine gun. Sighting down the barrel, he began to fire. The foremost of the zombies dropped with 3 shots to the head and chest. Shots rang out beside him. In his periphery, Dal saw Lena also riding without hands. She fired her machine gun mercilessly into the oncoming Nezhet. She was the most beautiful fucking thing he'd ever seen. 3 of the Nezhet were down, but the last 2 kept coming. Dal and Lena kept firing. He hit the first Nezhet several times in the chest. The zombie howled, flailing as she fell twitching to the ground. Hopefully that had been enough bullets to really kill her. Lena took out the legs of the remaining zombie. He collapsed to the ground, right in front of Dal's bike. Dal hissed, jerking at the handlebars. He clipped the heel of the zombie. The bike lurched. Dal stuck out a leg, barely managing to keep himself from falling. He felt the rubber tear on the sole of his Converse. Howls lit the night behind them. They'd drawn the attention of the Nezhet that had run towards Freddie Mercury. A massive horde of the undead now thundered down the street, coming straight toward them. "Keep going, Lena," he cried, struggling to right his bike. She gave him a wild look before flying by him, racing for the superstore. Dal managed to straighten out his bike and zoomed after her. They reached the front of Guy's Electronic Superstore at the same time. The world around them was bathed in the yellow and blue neon light of the store's sign. Like many of the other shops on the street, several of the front windows had been shot out. The difference was that Guy had black iron bars on all the windows for security. If they could just get inside, they'd be safe. Unfortunately, there were bars on the front door, too. They dropped their bikes and tried the handle, hoping to find it unlocked like the one at the furniture store. No such luck. The deadbolt was firmly in place. Before Dal could formulate a plan, Lena raised her machine gun and aimed it at the door. "Lena, no!" "There's no other way, Dal." She opened fire. Bullets tore through the glass, sending shards to the ground in a showering cascade. The deadbolt snapped under the onslaught, and the door flew open. They hauled ass into the superstore, barreling through the ruined front entryway. Glass crunched underfoot. Guy's Electronic Superstore was crammed full of televisions, VCRs and car stereo systems. Many of them lay on the floor in mangled heaps, shot up by Soviet bullets. "The stairs!" Lena cried. At the back of the shop was a set of stairs leading to a mezzanine that was crammed full of boxes. They dodged through the store. Just as they reached the stairs, the first of the Nezhet burst inside. A long, low growl rippled through the shop. Seconds later, several more prowled inside. Dal and Lena raced to the top of the stairs. Dal looked around wildly at the large cardboard boxes filled with televisions and other electronic equipment. Should he start chucking them down onto the Nezhet? Could they use them to barricade the stairs? How the hell were they supposed to connect the transmitter to the antenna? "Dal!" Lena yanked on his arm, trying to get his attention. "Look!" She pointed to a roof access hatch set into the ceiling. Roof. That was perfect. If they could get to the roof and lock out the Nezhet, they'd have access to the antenna. In wordless agreement, Dal and Lena scrambled onto the large boxes, rushing for the access hatch. Boxes tipped and fell in their haste. One of them broke open, spilling a 300-pound television to the floor. The reverberation of its fall echoed through the shop. Below, the zombies howled in a frenzy. The pounding of feet echoed in Dal's ears as the infected came for them. He launched himself at the access hatch. Luckily, it was a simple latch. He flung it open as the first of the Nezhet reached the mezzanine. Dal seized Lena around the waist and boosted her through the opening. She accidentally kicked him in the face as she scrambled onto the roof. Dal jumped after her, grabbing the edge of the hatch. He hauled himself up as two Nezhet leaped onto the boxes and began scuttling toward them. "Get out of the way!" Lena cried. Dal rolled sideways. The loose gravel on the rooftop bit through his jeans and shirt. Lena slammed the hatch shut. The zombies howled below them in frustration. "Can they get it open?" Lena whispered. Dal got to his feet, heart still pounding in his chest. There was 7 feet of space between the hatch and the closest boxes. It wasn't impossible to think a zombie could knock it open and get through. "You have to stand on it," Dal told her. He didn't like it, but there was nothing else up here to hold the hatch shut. Eyes wide, Lena moved to stand on top of the hatch. "As far as backup plans go, this one sucks." Her hands shook, but her eyes were fierce. Lena was in this to the end, even if she was scared shitless. "I can feel them hitting the hatch. I'm sorry to ask this of you." Dal hated putting her in harm's way. "We could drop a bomb on them, but that would leave no way for us to escape." "It's okay. We all have to do our part." Her gaze traveled to the massive TV antenna perched above them on a tall pole. It had to be at least 12 feet long. "Get moving, DJ Granger." She gave him a gentle shove. "The world needs you. I'll hold back the zombies." Dal hurried toward the antenna. He had 7 minutes.
If you're enjoying this series, be sure to check out Jesus Christ Zombie Killer. This series takes freakishly fast zombies, like you would find in the movie World War Z, and pits them against classic biblical heroes such as John the Baptist, Mary Magdalene, and Jesus. Available on Amazon, Kindle Unlimited, and select audiobook retailers. And now, back to the show.
Chapter 40. Time's Up. Jennifer stomped around the rooftop, glaring at Leo. He ignored her, shoulders tense as he watched downtown Bastopol. "If you insist on waiting, I'm at least going to get ready," she snarled. Muttering angrily, Leo was sure he was supposed to hear every word, Jennifer began lining up Nona's bombs along the edge of the roof. Leo joined her, preparing for the attack that was to come. Despite the raucous coming from downtown, the neigette around the theater building hadn't budged. "Try not to hit the ladder when you drop the bombs," Leo said. "We need it to get off the roof." Jennifer rolled her eyes, lining up more bombs. Leo pulled out 2 Zippo lighters, placing them at intervals along the neat line of black powder sachets. 5 minutes of mayhem. That was the plan. Set off a shit ton of bombs, raise holy hell, draw every Soviet and Sebastopol to the high school, and then make a run for it. Leo was well aware that 50,000 things could go wrong with this plan. 4 minutes, he said. Jennifer just shook her head at him. Grabbing the binos, Leo once again checked on Jim and Tate. They were ready and waiting on the cafeteria, bombs lined up along the edge. Anton and Bruce also had bombs lined up and waiting to go. Leo shook his hands up and down, trying to dispel the adrenaline that made them shake. He hoped they could pull off this mission. He hoped he wasn't royally fucking things up. He hoped his decision to stick to the plan wouldn't get Dal and Lena killed. He hoped. Jennifer grabbed his arm, turning his wrist so she could see the watch. "Time's up, Leo." Without waiting for his permission, she lit the first bomb and dropped it on the neigette below. Chapter 41. DJ Sniper. Dal lowered the transmitter to the rooftop and yanked the plug out of his backpack. Luckily, there were electrical outlets up here. He flipped open a switch cover and plugged in the cable. Now, he just had to connect the antenna to the transmitter. This would have been a lot easier if they were inside with access to the cable. Instead, he was going to have to hardwire the transmitter to the antenna. Between having to work on the Beetle and the shop classes he'd taken in high school, Dal knew how to strip wires and reconnect them. Luckily, he had his Swiss Army knife. That would do the trick. The antenna was on a 6-foot pole. Dal flipped open the Swiss Army knife and worked fast, undoing the screws that kept the pole upright. As soon as the pole came loose, he laid it sideways and exposed the wires going into the roof. Perfect. That's what he needed. He grabbed the lead-in cable, sliced off one end, and quickly cut through the casing. Then, using the Swiss Army knife screwdriver, he opened the back of the transmitter. Despite everything, he grinned at what he saw. The transmitter had a simple screw terminal. All he had to do was wrap the wires around the screws, and they'd be in business. In only a few minutes, Dal had the transmitter connected to the antenna and ready to go. Not bad for a rush job. "Lena," he called, "I'm ready to broadcast. I'm going to need you to push the antenna upright so the signal will go out instead of up. Are the Neigets still trying to get up here? I can hear them." She remained planted on the hatch. "But I think they knocked the boxes over. None of them has tried to push open the hatch in the last 2 minutes. We're going to have to risk it." "Okay." With one last look at the hatch beneath her feet, Lena hustled over to the antenna. It wasn't heavy, no more than 25 or 30 pounds, and she could easily push it upright. Dal plugged the microphone into the transmitter and flipped the on switch. He let out a shout of triumph when it lit up. "Are we live?" Lena asked. "Yeah." Dal looked down at his watch. Just as he did, several explosions went up simultaneously from the high school. "That's my big brother, right on time." Lena turned to Dal. "Your turn, DJ Sniper." DJ Sniper. That had a nice ring to it, even if he wasn't a Chiquino by blood. Dal raised the microphone to his lips. This might not be how he'd envisioned his DJ dream coming to pass, but in a weird way, he was still fulfilling a dream. "This is DJ Sniper, broadcasting to you live from West County, California. I'm reporting from the middle of the hostile Russian takeover. I repeat, the Russians have taken over West County, California. I have important information for everyone out there. Please listen carefully and share with everyone you know. It may save lives." Explosions continued to go up from the high school. Zombies howled, and he heard vehicles rushing through the streets. It took all of Dal's willpower to stay focused on his task. He lifted the pocket-sized notebook he'd carried here from the cabin. It contained a list of all the information they'd gathered since the invasion began, a mere 2 days ago. Dal leaned into the microphone, beginning with the story of how Russian soldiers arrived in Greyhound buses. He talked about the Nezhet virus that turned people into zombies, and how the zombies were driven to bite and spread the virus. He shared the chilling fact that the Russians had figured out a way to make themselves immune to zombies. Dal even revealed the Russians expected everyone infected with the virus to be dead in 7 to 10 days, and that a second offensive unit was arriving in the next 2 weeks. He talked as fast as he could, all the while keeping an eye on his watch. 5 minutes. That's all he had. Once 5 minutes was up, Leo and his team would cease their attack and fall back. Dal planned to make every second count. Chapter 42. Killbox. "This isn't working," Jennifer cried. "If we want to use this ladder to get off the roof, we're going to need to drop some bombs on the other side of the theater." She was right. For every Nezhet they killed with a bomb, another took its place. The bodies were piling up, but so were the ranks of the undead. They were effectively blocking their escape route. Lucky for them, the small, homemade bombs were effective at killing zombies with one strike. Those who survived the blast were often incapacitated in some way. Body parts, mostly arms and legs, were strewn across the concrete and planters. "Come on!" Leo grabbed his backpack and raced to the side of the roof that bordered the street. They began lighting bombs and lobbing them over the side at Nezhet. As soon as the bombs began to go off, more zombies streamed into sight. "Time?" Jennifer asked. 2 minutes. A group of 5 Nezhet barreled into view. Even in the dark, it was impossible to miss the infected black veins bulging across their faces, necks, and arms. Poor bastards. It wasn't their fault they ended up like this. Leo lit a fuse and dropped the bomb, then a second one for good measure. They exploded in a gory array of blood and skin. Jennifer dropped a few on another group that came around from the south. The sound of car engines filled the air, mingling with the barks and howls of the zombies. Russians were on their way. Leo forced himself to keep cool, reminding himself this was all part of the plan. They would give Dal and Lena the full 5 minutes. They were counting on them. Luckily, the Russians and zombies weren't the only things making noise. Echoing through the campus was the sound of bombs and gunshots. Anton, Bruce, Jim, and Tate were busy. His team was making a spectacle as planned. They took out infected up and down the narrow street. "Over there," Jennifer pointed. Leo followed the line of her finger to the northern end of the road. The first of the Russians had arrived. They drove right into the kill box, oblivious to the trap that had been laid. There were 4 open-top Jeeps speeding down the street. They knocked aside any Nezhet in the way. Russians were packed inside, many of them perched on the roll bar with their machine guns. Their attention was on the street as they scanned for the source of the attack. They hadn't yet realized the attack came from above. The 4 Jeeps drove straight past the cafeteria, unaware of Jim and Tate lying in wait. As soon as the Soviets were within range, a dozen bombs sailed over the edge of the building. His friends might not be quarterbacks, but they both knew how to throw a ball. Their aim was true. Leo let up a shout of triumph as Nona's sachet bombs landed in the back of the Jeeps. The explosions were nothing short of spectacular. Bodies were ejected out of the vehicles, machine guns exploded. The bottom blasted out of one Jeep, spewing the tires every which way. "Take that, fuckers!" Jennifer readied another round of bombs as the next group of vehicles poured onto the street. This time, there were 6 Jeeps. It looked like the Russians had raided a car lot. Every last one of them was in a shiny new Jeep. "Get the hell out of there, guys," Leo murmured. Jim and Tate were supposed to fall back as soon as they gave up their location. This next wave of Soviets would fall to Anton and Bruce. Sure enough, the Russians stopped and opened fire on the cafeteria. While their attention was on the western building, Anton and Bruce attacked from the east. The bleachers were at least 25 yards south of the Russians. Anton was up to the challenge. Watching through the binoculars, Leo saw Bruce light fuses and pass bombs to Anton. From the top of the bleachers, his little brother lobbed bomb after bomb at the Russians. The sparking sachets lit the night like tiny fireworks. They began to explode. The back of a Jeep was torn off. More bodies were ejected out of vehicles. A rocket launcher went off, sending a missile straight into the air. It detonated over the school like a firework, lighting up the campus. Leo looked at his watch. 60 seconds. Time for Anton and Bruce to retreat. The next group of Russians belonged to him and Jennifer. Shouting drew Leo's attention. A group of 5 Soviets on foot burst into view, running out from between the buildings and onto the street. They beelined straight for the bleachers, heedless of the Nezhet that still prowled the street. To them, the infected were harmless. They opened fire on Anton and Bruce. "Shit!" Leo dropped to one knee and sighted down his rifle. "Jennifer, keep an eye out for more Russians." He didn't like revealing his location, but with any luck, he'd get rid of these assholes before the next fleet of vehicles arrived. Leo fired. The first Russian dropped, a clean shot to the back. Leo racked his weapon and fired a second time, dropping a second Russian. 2 down, 3 to go. And now he had their attention. Good. It would give Anton and Bruce time to regroup. Leo sighted on the 3rd Russian. The idiot looked around wildly, trying to discern where the shot had come from. Leo shot him in the chest and racked his gun. 2 left. They raced around a car parked on the road and took shelter in a circle of Nezhet, using the infected for cover. Assholes! The infected barely noticed them, their attention still on the bleachers. Leo inhaled slowly, waiting for an opening. Distantly, he noted the sound of cars, a whole bunch of them, getting close. Really, really close. "Leo," Jennifer hissed, "they're here!" Leo tuned her out. His sole focus was Anton and Bruce. Hell, if he was going to let anything happen to them. Shots cracked out from the bleachers. Anton and Bruce returned fire at the Russians. One of the Soviets yelped, momentarily slipping out from behind a zombie. Leo took him out with a shot to the head. One more. He racked the gun, never taking his eyes from the crowd massed at the base of the bleachers. "Get out of there, Anton." "Leo!" He could just make out the last Soviet. He was using a knot of 3 Nezhet as a shield. "Screw this," Jennifer muttered. "We don't have time for this shit." Before Leo could stop her, she lobbed a bomb. It sailed straight for the knot of Nezhet. Chapter 43. Touchdown. "What the fuck?" Leo shouted, never taking his eyes from the street below. "You just gave up our location." "I gave up our location?" Jennifer screamed. "The Russians are here." Her bomb exploded. The explosion sent a ripple through the mass of zombies. The Soviet was exposed for no more than a few seconds. It was long enough for Leo to drop the man with 2 shots to the chest. "Get out of there, Anton!" he bellowed. Shots ripped through the air, zipping over his head and thudding into the side of the auditorium. Leo threw himself down flat against the roof. Jennifer shrieked and dropped to the rooftop beside him. More bullets flew over them. "Fuck!" Leo pounded his fist on the tar and gravel beneath him. He'd fucked up. He knew it. He'd deviated from the plan. But it was either that or let his little brother get pinned down by those communist bastards. He'd made his choice. Now he had to live with it. Fuck it. He was ready to die to save the ones he loved. It was a good way to go out. He grabbed a Zippo and 2 bombs. "Get out of here," he said to Jennifer. "Take the ladder. I'll catch up when I can." He touched the Zippo to the fuses. As soon as they began to spark, he jumped up. In a split second, he took in the mayhem on the street below him. There were wrecked cars and bodies everywhere. Another 10 jeeps had arrived. They weaved through the destruction, their sights set on the theater. The foremost of them was almost upon them. Even in the dark, Leo could see the rocket launcher aimed in their direction. He threw both bombs and dropped, scuttling back from the edge, and ran smack into Jennifer. "What the hell?" He grabbed the back of her jean jacket and dragged her backward. "I told you to get out of here." "Fuck you," she shouted back. "I'm not leaving your crazy ass up here to die." The rocket hit the edge of the roof where Leo had been standing and exploded. The shock wave sent them both rolling across the rooftop. Gravel tore at his exposed skin and bit through his jeans. Seconds later, more explosions went off, this time from below them. Leo scrambled back to his feet. There was a gaping hole in a huge section of the roof. At least half of it was gone. Shit. If he went anywhere near there, the whole thing would collapse under his weight. "Get out of here, Jen. I mean it." Crouching low, he ran to the north side of the building, giving the hole a wide berth. Jennifer followed him, pulling more bombs out of the backpack. "I already told you, I'm not leaving your ass to die up here." She lit a bomb and shoved it at him. Gritting his teeth, Leo took a few running steps and threw. The bomb sailed through the air, heading for the next closest jeep. His bomb wasn't the only one. Popping up from behind the bleachers, Anton lobbed several bombs of his own. "Touchdown!" Anton bellowed as one of his bombs took out the side of a jeep. "Take that, fuckers!" Leo ducked back down as the Russians returned fire. God damn it! Why wasn't anyone listening to him? Why weren't they falling back and getting the hell out of here? It was clear from the look on Jennifer's face that she wasn't going to budge. He chanced to look back out at the street. 3 jeeps down, but there were still 7 to go. Due to the wreckage and debris cluttering the road, they were forced to slow and weave their way up the street. The closest of them was 50 yards away. Leo could make a 50-yard throw with his eyes closed. Another rocket was fired, this one at the bleachers. It struck the northern side, spewing shrapnel in every direction. "Anton!" Leo cried. Jennifer shoved another sparking bomb into his hand. Leo made his throw. Jennifer kept lighting. He kept throwing. The bleachers listed to one side. Leo could hardly believe his eyes when Anton popped up on the far end and lobbed another bomb. He joined Leo in the assault, lobbing bomb after bomb. 50 yards, 55 yards, 60. The 2 brothers lit up the night. Their arms were strong, and their aim was true. Bullets pierced the air around them. Leo and Anton began ducking down between throws, doing their best to avoid enemy fire. Soon, only 2 jeeps remained. But the Soviets had wisened up. They drew to a halt when they were 75 yards, maybe even 80 yards away. He saw them readying their rocket launchers. Leo knew he could throw the ball at least 70 yards. He'd done it many times. It was one of the reasons he'd been so heavily recruited senior year. If he hoped to survive the next 60 seconds, he was going to have to throw farther than that. Once again, Jennifer shoved a lit bomb into his hands. "Give them hell, Leo." Everything leaped into focus around him, just as it always had on the football field. Jennifer beside him, Anton and Bruce nearby. The enemy 3/4 of the way down the field. His entire life was all about this moment. Leo knew it as sure as he knew the color of his own eyes. Everything boiled down to right now. He would either live or die. He sure as fuck didn't plan on dying. He ran several steps forward and through. The sparking bomb zipped through the air in a perfect arc. It was a damn good throw. Damn good. 75 yards at least. It bounced onto the hood of the first Jeep. Then something happened. The bomb went off, but it wasn't a regular explosion. Nona's bombs, while effective, were modest in their blast radius. They were just good enough to fuck shit up. They weren't enough to blow shit to the moon. The explosion that went off in front of Leo was like something out of a Hollywood movie. A huge fireball filled the street. It blasted the Jeep straight into the air. It caught several other Jeeps in the blast. He realized the Russians were carrying large munitions, things more powerful than the rocket launchers they'd encountered so far. Missiles or grenades or who the hell knew what. Leo had hit the vehicle carrying them. And the heat of the blast seared over Leo's skin. Shrapnel spewed down the street. He covered his face and hunched down as debris hurtled through the air. A wheel hit the rooftop no more than 5 feet to his left. Off to either side, he heard Jennifer and the others yelling his name. He distantly realized they were cheering for him, his own personal crowd in the biggest game of his life. "Cal Berkeley is eating shit right now," Jennifer cried. "Time's up," Leo replied. "We're out of here." Jennifer didn't argue with him. She beelined for the ladder. Leo was right behind her. They raced through the campus. Leo kept his rifle up and shot anything that moved. They met up with Bruce and Anton at the edge of the school. The younger boys were covered in soot and grime. Their eyes were hard, their jaws set. Leo realized that in a few short minutes they'd transformed from boys into soldiers. He grabbed Anton in a rough hug. "Nice throws." Anton thumped Leo on the back. "You too, brother." "Time to get the hell out of here," Leo said. The Russians were in disarray, but that wouldn't last long. He hoped Jim and Tate were safe. "Wait!" Anton pulled a bottle of orange spray paint out of his jacket. Time was short, but Leo didn't stop him. He wanted the Soviets to know who had fucked up their day. He and the others kept watch while Anton quickly sprayed the word "snipers" in giant orange letters on the pavement. "Take that, assholes," Anton said. "We're not going down without a fight." "Damn straight," Leo said. "Now come on, let's get out of here." Chapter 44. Antenna. "Time's up." Dell yanked the plug out of the back of the transmitter. "Did I miss anything?" he asked Lena. "Not a thing." She beamed at him and lowered the antenna to the ground. Dal lashed the transmitter to the backpack. Even though it was heavy, he didn't want to leave it behind. There was no telling if they might need it again in the future. "Leo is giving them hell." Lena looked in the direction of the high school. A series of explosions echoed through the town. Nona might be able to hear it all the way back at the cabin. They hurried back to the hatch that led down into the superstore. Thinking about all the nejat inside made Dal's throat dry. How the hell were they going to escape? Dal swung his machine gun around. "You open the hatch. I'll shoot anything that tries to come through." Lena nodded, positioning herself to one side of the opening. "Ready?" Dal aimed, finger resting on the trigger. He sighted down the barrel, ready to shoot the first zombie that came into sight. "Ready." She yanked it open. Nothing happened. A wrinkle appeared on Lena's brow. She peered through the hatch. Dal? I think they're all gone." He wasn't sure he'd heard her right. "They're all gone?" he repeated dumbly. Lena opened the hatch all the way, letting it thud softly against the gravel rooftop. Nothing but silence echoed up from the superstore. They crouched over the opening, peering inside. The boxes that had been neatly stacked on the mezzanine were in disarray. Many of them had torn open, spilling televisions and other equipment onto the floor. But there wasn't a nejat in sight. Leo drew them away. It was the only explanation that made any sense. "That's impressive." Lena flashed him a grin. "My brother is an impressive guy." Dal went first into the hatch. Without the boxes, it was a 15-foot drop to the ground. Good thing he was tall. He dangled by his hands, angling his body so he'd miss the broken remains of a big-screen TV when he landed. Debris crunched under his Converse when he hit the floor. Lena came through after him, dangling from the top. Dal caught her around the waist as she dropped. He ignored how good she felt in his arms, reminding himself he wasn't good enough for her. They crept through the ruin of the mezzanine, picking their way through televisions, VCRs, speakers, and smashed boxes. The store remained eerily quiet. The silence was punctuated by the battle taking place over at the high school. "Do you think they're okay?" Lena asked. Yes. Dal wouldn't let himself believe anything less. Leo knows how to kick ass. They were nearly to the stairs when Lena stopped. Look at this. Using her foot, she pushed a dented piece of black plastic aside. Beneath it was a wide, flat box about 6 feet long. Is that a TV antenna? She asked. Dal knelt down to read the box. Yeah, it's not as big as the one we just used, but it is an antenna. You know, there might be other messages people need to hear in the future. Lena studied the antenna box. You still have the transmitter. If we take the antenna, we'll be able to broadcast. It will be risky, Dal said. If we aren't careful, the Russians will be able to track us. So we'll be careful. Come on, help me. Lena pried at the box with her hands. Dal helped her tear it open and pull out the antenna. Out of the box, it didn't weigh more than 15 or 20 pounds. Lena was so lean that she was able to fit between the rods. The antenna balanced easily on either side of her. I should be able to balance it on the bike like this, Lena said. We should take it. She was right. It was good to have the antenna. Who knew what other important information they might come across? They needed to do whatever they could to help win this war. We should take it, Dal agreed. He gathered up the cables that came out of the box, dropping them into his backpack. They crept down the stairs and through the ruined superstore. Oddly enough, their bikes were still just outside the entryway. The street beyond was quiet. There was no sign of zombies or Russians anywhere. Dal helped Lena arrange the antenna across her bike. With her being able to slip between the middle rods, it was fairly well balanced. If we have to make a run for it, drop it, Dal said. It's not worth dying over. Agreed. A huge boom went up from the high school. Dal and Lena turned reflexively toward the sound. It wasn't anything like the explosions they'd heard up until this point. Something big had just gone off. Think they're okay? Lena whispered. Dal squeezed her hand. Yes. Come on, let's get the hell out of here. He wasn't about to waste the opportunity Leo and the others were giving them to escape. Side by side, he and Lena rode out of town. Chapter 45. Not Special. It was almost dawn when the Chiquino farm came into view. Dal was so tired he could hardly see straight. Had it really only been 48 hours since the first Russians attacked? It felt like 48 years. He was used to functioning on little sleep, but this went beyond anything he'd ever experienced before. He focused on his bunk bed back at the cabin and what it would feel like to lay down. He might sleep for 3 days if Nona allowed it. The sky was a dark gray, the stars on the eastern horizon beginning to fade. The bike tires crunched on the gravel road that led to the Chiquino farmhouse. Dal struggled to keep his eyes open. It was too dark to see clearly. It was too cold, too. His breath fogged the air. The apple trees were wet with dew. He jerked as a long, low growl rolled through the darkness. Zombies, Lena whispered. She still had the antenna balanced across her bike. They both stopped and looked toward the Chiquino barn. The sound had come from that direction. Don't they know it's time for bed? Dal let his bike drop softly to the ground. I don't think they sleep. Lena shouldered her rifle, jaw set. She left the antenna on the ground next to her bike. "Come on, let's get this over with," Dal said. "It doesn't sound like there's more than one or two of them." The sooner they got rid of the zombies, the sooner they could get back to the cabin. "I hope we don't know them," Lena muttered. "I didn't like shooting Mrs. Castor." Mrs. Castor had been the second-grade teacher at the elementary school. She'd come after them when they fled Bastapol. Dal locked away that memory. It was too much to deal with on top of everything else. The Cecchino farm looked untouched. Jennifer's white car still sat in the driveway. Everything else was quiet and undisturbed. They went around the far side of the barn in the direction of the growling. As they rounded the corner, Dal felt his breath leave his lungs. He was abruptly wide awake. There were only 2 zombies in front of them. Separating them from the infected was a chain-link fence, the boundary between the Cecchino and Granger farms. At the sight of Dal and Lena, the zombies let loose that strange barking sound. They attacked the fence with gusto, throwing their full body weight at the metal. The fence rattled under the attack, but held. It wasn't the 2 crazed zombies and their dirty clothing that disturbed Dal. What froze his insides was the fact that his parents didn't look much different than they had before the virus took them. "Get out, Dallas! Get out and don't ever come back!" His mother's face was twisted into a snarl of rage as she threw herself over and over at the fence. She looked just like she had the day she kicked Dal out of the house when he was 14. There was blood all over her shoulder. It soaked the front of her shirt. His father had once thrown her into the family curio cabinet. She hit so hard the glass broke. She looked then just as she looked now, ravaged and covered in blood. Even then, she had defended her husband. Dal tried to come between her and his dad, tried to kick his dad in the shin, even though he was only 10 years old and his dad was twice his size and 10 times scarier. "Leave him alone, Dallas. You hear me?" "You want me to take care of them for you?" Lena's voice cut through Dal's stupor. She checked the remaining bullets in her magazine. "I have 3 shots left." Dal drew in a ragged breath. "No, I'll do it." Why had he just said that? He could hardly bear to look at his parents, let alone fire a gun at them. He needed to get away. He needed not to look at his parents. But he couldn't help it. They kept growling, kept throwing themselves at the fence in dogged determination. The infection spread all across their bodies from the inside out. Lena reached across the distance and squeezed Dal's hand. He squeezed back. Never before had he been so grateful for her presence. She understood him. His dad's mouth was covered with blood, no doubt from biting his mother. It was the first time Dal had ever seen him with a bloody mouth. Dal had always been the one with a bloody lip, or his mom. Dal flashed back to that moment in Rossi when he'd made eye contact with his father as he drove by. He thought that had been the lowest point of his life, even worse than all that had come before. In some ways, to be completely disregarded was worse than being a personal punching bag. The fence that separated him from his father was more defense than he'd ever had as a kid. He tried to think back to the non-shitty days with his parents. There had been some of those. Like the time he'd gotten an A on a math test and his mom took him to the store to buy him a Snickers. Or the time his dad bought him his very first package of condoms just in case. Dal had been only 13. There were a few days like that. Dal kept those memories in a box in his mind, taking them out to sort through them on occasion. Looking at them hurt more than the bad memories. They were a tease, a taste of something he could never truly have. Dal dropped back behind the barn, out of sight of his parents. His legs were wobbly with fatigue. He sank to the ground, letting his head thunk back against the wood. He closed his eyes, letting the persistent growls of his parents wash over him. Lena sat down next to him. Without saying a word, she laced her fingers with his. "I'm like him, you know," Dal said, without opening his eyes. "What?" "I'm like my dad." She had to know that already. She'd seen him lose control. She'd seen the beast that lurked under the surface, but saying it aloud felt like a confession. Lena didn't respond, only applied more pressure to the hand she held. "Do you know the last thing your dad said to me?" He forced himself to open his eyes and look at her. Lena shook her head, gaze steady on him. "No. He told me to take care of his little girl." Dal drew in a shaky breath and forced himself to release her hand. "You shouldn't be with someone like me, Lena." She didn't immediately respond. Dal closed his eyes again, struggling to accept a reality where Lena wasn't his. She stirred beside him. A soft sound filled the space between them. Dal opened his eyes to find her sawing with a pocket knife at the multicolored bracelets that adorned her wrist. They were woven from embroidery thread. Lena spent many nights weaving bracelets on the living room floor in front of the television with the family. The many-colored threads fell away. Lena held her bare wrist out for him to see. Dal's chest seized. Marching up and down Lena's slender wrist were parallel white scars. They were thin and white and unmistakable. Sorrow filled him. He cradled her arm and pressed a kiss to the scars. "You're not the only one with darkness inside you, Dal." He pressed her wrist against his forehead, wishing he could absorb all her pain. "Why?" he asked. "I was so lost when Mom died. Everything just hurt." He gathered her close and held her. She rested her cheek against him. "You should have told me. You couldn't help me. No one could. I had to figure things out on my own. That's why I started listening to the Russian language tapes. They helped me find Mom. I know that sounds weird, but sometimes when I had my headphones on, I swear I could feel Mom sitting beside me." Her chest rattled with a shaky inhale. "Going to the anti-nuke rallies and protests, that was just a nice distraction, you know? It gave me something to focus on that was bigger than myself. I mean, what was the loss of one person in comparison to an entire country being nuked?" Her laugh was bitter. "Who would have thought they'd come up with a virus that turned us all into zombies?" "How long has it been?" he asked. "I haven't cut myself in almost 2 years. Things got better when I found the tapes. Life had a purpose when I joined the rallies and the marches." Dal held her tight, never wanting to let her go. How had he missed this? How had any of them missed it? They'd all been sad, sure, but there was no excuse for missing Lena's pain. "We all have parts of ourselves we're not proud of, Dal. You're not special that way. But you saw me. I beat that zombie girl to a pulp in the Goodwill, even after she was dead. Better than beating her like that when she was alive. But I would have. You saw me, Lena. I was out of control in Bastopol and Rossi. It had been the same when he punched that goat as a kid. I'm like my dad. You're nothing like your dad. She leaned back to look at him, a dent marring her brow. You don't hurt the ones you love. You protect us. That's the exact opposite of your dad. He wasn't sure how, but somehow Lena had just flipped all his self-perceptions upside down. It was confusing. You make me out better than I am. You know what Dad said to me before he died? What? He said, "Take care of Dallas, Lena. He needs you." Dad wouldn't have said that if he thought you were a monster. Dal absorbed her words. Had Mr. Cecchino really said that? I think that was Dad's way of giving us his blessing. He had to know how we felt about each other. What if I hurt you someday? He whispered. What if I lose my temper and turn into my dad? Lena snorted. You'd never hurt me, Dallas Granger. But you might beat the shit out of anyone who does, even if it's just a goat. She snuggled up against him. I kinda like that. God, he loved this girl. If he lived long enough, he was going to marry her. He knew that as surely as he knew his shoe size. She kissed him. It was a long, soft kiss mixed with the salt of tears. Dal wasn't sure if the tears belonged to him, to Lena, or to them both. He grieved for the remembered pain she wore in her scars. He grieved for the loss of Mr. Cecchino. He even grieved for his own parents, whom he'd never had a chance to love. There were times when I wanted to kill my dad. How ironic he was now being given the chance to do just that. Even when I was little, I'd get so mad I'd go outside and throw rocks or kick trees. I'd plot ways to fight back. But he was always bigger and stronger than me. It's time to let him go, Dal. It's time to let both of them go. Dal kissed her one last time before getting to his feet. Resolute, he grabbed his Soviet-issued machine gun and strode around the corner of the barn. Lena was by his side. His parents went nuts at the sight of them, redoubling their efforts to break through the fence. He walked straight toward them, no hesitation in his steps. Younger versions of himself walked beside him. The 8-year-old with the black eye, the 11-year-old with the dislocated shoulder, the 14-year-old with the cracked ribs. They fanned out around Dal like an army. They wanted revenge. They wanted retribution. All Dal wanted was peace. Peace for himself, peace for his estranged parents, and peace for the fucked-up little kid who still lived inside him. He went right up to the fence and pointed his gun at his father's face. The feral rictus of his mouth was the same one that had raged over him as a kid. Some people were monsters before the Russians got here. Dal pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the night. It rippled through time, back through the younger versions of himself. It sent a shockwave through his body. His dad dropped to the ground, dead. Unlike the night when Dal first dared to throw a return punch, his mother only blinked. She barely spared a glance for the dead man beside her before once again attacking the fence. She was as single-minded in her devotion as she had always been. Dal shifted the barrel of the gun and fired a second time. His mother fell across the body of his father. For the first time in his life, Dal's parents were quiet and at peace with one another. Chapter 46. Not Forgotten. The day after their mission into Bastopol, Leo found himself on a ladder at the back of the cabin. Behind him were the breathtaking views south of Pole Mountain. It was early evening. The fog crept in, steeping the land below them with fluffy white. It was almost easy to imagine the world wasn't a horror show beneath those clouds. Nona stood nearby with a small tray. On it were 8 shot glasses and a bottle of grappa. Surrounding the ladder were Dal, Lena, Anton, Bruce, Jennifer, Jim, and Tate. Everyone had made it back from Bastopol in one piece. Tate had taken a bullet in the leg, but Nona had stitched him up. The rest of them had their fair share of cuts, scrapes, and bruises, but considering what they'd been through, Leo considered them lucky. "You're off-center," Anton said. "Lean a little to your left." Leo leaned to the left, sinking his knife into the wood. As everyone watched, he carved 3 names into the wall: Giuseppe Cecchino, Adam McCarthy, Lars Guerra. Beneath the names were the words, "Not Forgotten." It wasn't a statue or a monument in a town square, but it would do. It would keep the memories of their friends and family alive. Leo hoped to God he wouldn't have to add any more names to this list. When he finished carving, he dropped to the ground and stood beneath the memorial. Everyone else spread around him in a semicircle. "Tonight, we gather to remember our fallen," he said. "We didn't ask for this war, but it came to our doorstep. Every single one of us has faced this invasion head on. Some of us have lived to fight another day. Others will live on in our memories." "Never forgotten," Anton said. "Never forgotten," Leo agreed. "The names of our fallen will be honored here." He looked up at the list of names carved into the wood. "Let's go around and share a memory of everyone who's given their life for this fight. I'll never forget the first time I bit off the head of a worm in an apple. I was 8. Dad laughed so hard he snorted soup out of his nose." Smiles went up around the group, but no one laughed. Leo understood. After everything they'd seen and done in the last few days, life didn't seem to have any humor left. He was glad he shared the story anyway. It was a cherished memory. Dal spoke up next, his arm around Lena. "Mr. Cecchino took me to the Goodwill to buy a dresser and a bookshelf when I moved in with you guys. We stopped at Foster's Freeze and had a soft serve before coming home." Dal's voice grew raspy with emotion. "He was the kindest man I ever met." They went around the circle. Dal and Bruce shared stories about their fallen varsity football brothers. Everyone else shared stories of Mr. Cecchino. When they finished, Nona lifted the bottle of grappa from her tray. "To our fallen," she said solemnly. Nona filled the shot glasses and passed around the tray, letting everyone take a glass. "To our fallen." Leo raised his glass to the sky, picturing his father's face. "Goodbye, Dad," he said silently. "I promise to make you proud." Around him was coughing and sputtering as the shots were downed. Leo hissed between his teeth as fiery liquid burned its way down his esophagus. He surveyed his companions as shot glasses were returned to the tray. They'd delivered a blow to the invaders they would not soon forget. They'd taken out a contingent of enemy soldiers and gotten valuable information out to the people. They were a strong team, a unit. They were the snipers. "What's next?" Tate asked. His leg had been stitched and bandaged by Nona. There was a long, gruesome tale about how Nona had removed the bullet using a knife, grappa, and kitchen tongs. There were bloodstains on the kitchen table from the ordeal, but Tate was alive and moving around with the help of a walking stick. "Last I checked, there were still Russians out there. They all need to die." "You need to let your leg heal," Jim informed his brother. "I can defend my country with a bad leg," Tate said, eyes fierce. "Just let me ride one of the horses." "Don't be stupid." Nona's hand twitched, but she refrained from whacking him in the back of the head. "I just finished stitching you up." Leo held up a hand. To his surprise, everyone turned to him expectantly. Even Nona. "I have the next mission for the snipers." His gaze flicked to Jennifer. He had a promise to keep. "We're going to get Jennifer's little sister in Westville." "What the hell?" Bruce frowned. "We need to defend our country, not go off to find a teenager who's probably just fine where she is." "She's my sister," Jennifer glared at Bruce. "You can stay behind if you don't want to help." "We should be plotting our next big strike," Bruce argued. "We're going to Westville," Leo cut in firmly. "And if we happen to see any Russians on the way, we can take care of them. Zombies, too." Jim gave a curt nod. "That's more like it." "Team Sniper!" Bruce smacked a fist against his chest. "We need to make more bombs. I'll get the aprons." Nona slid the cork into the grappa bottle. "I want DJ Sniper to send more broadcasts. The people need a voice in the dark. Someone to give them hope. Leo, Dal needs to get the antenna hooked up." "Everyone inside." Leo herded his team around the cabin. "Time to plan. We'll make more bombs while we talk about the antenna and our mission to Westville. Anton, there's a stack of maps in the glove compartment of Dad's truck. Grab them." Anton peeled away without a word of complaint, heading to the truck. Everyone else made their way up the stairs and into the cabin. Jim had one arm around his brother, supporting him up the stairs. Jennifer caught up with Leo. "Thanks. I made you a promise." "Thanks for keeping your promise. I'd want the same if Anton or Lena was stuck somewhere." On impulse, Leo put a brotherly arm around Jennifer's shoulders and squeezed. Together, they ascended the stairs. It was a surprise to realize he was no longer pissed off at the world. Hell, he might go so far as to say that he was happy he hadn't gone off to play ball at Cal Berkeley. If he had, he wouldn't be here right now defending his home and his family. Leo couldn't think of any place in the world he'd rather be. He had a team and a purpose. Life didn't happen on a field under the lights. Life happened when you weren't looking. The plays that counted were the ones you never saw coming, the ones you never expected to make. And Leo was ready for whatever came next. He wouldn't stop until his home was free. This has been Red Virus, Zommunist Invasion, Book 1, written by Camille Picott, read by Al Kessel. Copyright 2020 by Camille Picott.
If you're enjoying Zommunist Invasion, be sure to sign up for the VIP bunker. Inside, you'll find an exclusive Zommunist Invasion origin story not available anywhere else. You can join the bunker by heading over to my website at www.camillepicott.com. Thanks so much!